Alright, I am so excited for today's video. ASUS, they approached me to make some interesting content for Cybersecurity Month, something that ties in with their expert book range of laptops for businesses. I thought, what a great opportunity to fuse together what I'm doing on the business channel with what I'm doing over here. Now over there, I help people get ahead with their careers. Over here, obviously, I help people choose the right tech. Now, many of our audience are actually students, and a lot of students are studying cybersecurity. So I thought, let's do a series where I interview leaders in the industry. I'm going to ask them to share how they got started, what made their career successful, and of course, what tech they use. Today, I'll be speaking to Chris Porter. He is the Chief Security Officer at Fannie Mae. Now, if you're outside the USA, Fannie Mae, they are one of the most important players in the mortgage space. Now, I have put timestamps down below the video. If you want to just jump around, go for your life, I won't feel offended. But before we get into the interview, a quick word about ASUS's expert book line of business laptops. As you know, I do due diligence on all our sponsors, and here's what I found. Expert books, they have many ease of use enhancements specifically designed for small and medium-sized businesses, which includes entrepreneurs like us and remote workers. Enhancements include more ports, and their keyboards have more travel for a more comfortable typing experience. Their hinges are tested to support 50,000 opens, more than double their consumer counterparts. Their ports are reinforced to handle more use, and they are tested to withstand being dropped from twice the height of a consumer laptop. Heck, they even test dropping expert books from an even higher height to ensure that if they do break, they don't split into parts that could actually hurt someone. Now, just like other major business laptop manufacturers, ASUS, they do offer long warranties on their expert book range at 3 to 5 years. They even offer on-site next business day servicing at many locations. If you want to know more, check the link below, and now, here's the interview. All right, so Chris, thank you very much for being with me today and the whole of our audience here. Really appreciate it. So I thought, let's just get started with maybe you could describe your role and the scope of your role.
Chris Porter. I am the Chief Security Officer at Fannie Mae, and I run all of our cybersecurity, which is inclusive of identity and access management, vulnerability management, threat detection and response, the whole thing. I have physical security, so this is protecting all of our buildings and our people, our executives, and I also own enterprise architecture, so a little bit of a technology on top of everything else.
Well, clearly, you've got a very big scope of your role, and yeah, once again, we really appreciate having you. So today is all about cybersecurity, careers in cybersecurity, and all of that kind of thing. So I see a lot of kind of confusion in the space between a role in cybersecurity and a role in fraud. And I think part of the reason for that is we tend to, at least in my space in YouTube, we see huge YouTube channels on the fraud space, but I haven't seen as many big ones on the cybersecurity space. And if you could kind of speak to that this difference.
Yeah, certainly. And to be honest, there's quite a bit of fusion that is coming in between the two different sort of fields. I was at Black Hat actually earlier this year, and there's a woman named Allison Miller, and maybe I'll share the link and you can share it with all the viewers, who talked about the cyberification of fraud and the fraudification of cyber, which I thought was a really fantastic presentation. But generally, when I think about, cybersecurity, I'm here to protect the digital assets of my company, and from all the kinds of attackers that might be out there, whether it's nation states, organized crime, hacktivists, someone in their dad's or mom's basement, all of those sorts of things, right? And this is to protect, against data breaches, availability type threats, et cetera. And when I think of fraud, it's slightly different. Some of the techniques might be the same, but really fraud is going to be a little bit more about intentional deception, certain types of practices. And it can be everything from credit card fraud, where I'm stealing from a data breach, then I'm using that information from that data breach of credit card numbers to go buy stuff. And so you have a slightly different view on things, on like how some of these things are even detected. So they're very interlinked with one another. But the way in my mind I kind of look at it is, when data or information is turned into money, it's more financial losses that can be kind of quantified, then it's more on the fraud side. And then on the cyber side, it's going to be like the techniques and the way that some of that information may have been stolen to get from the beginning.
Yeah. It sounds like just from just listening to you right now, and the reason, again, for the audience that I'm kind of drilling into this as one of our early topics is because I think that a lot of people looking for a career path are hearing cyber as the career path, seeing fraud in the YouTube videos, and we kind of got to discern the difference between the two.
What I think is different on fraud and cyber is on how you control things in some ways. So in some ways, when you're measuring cybersecurity, like you can make some changes to your control environment and you may not see the change of what happened. Like, because a lot of times on cyber side, you're preventing things from happening from the get-go, right? Like you may not see, all right, well, I didn't have a data breach. I still don't have data breaches. I don't know whether my cyber is working or they're just not attacking me today. Whereas on the fraud side, like if you think about it on like credit card side, I can go make some tweaks to the model and say, you know what, if this credit card is being used at a place that's 100 miles from where this person lives, then I can make some changes in that model and tweak it, and I can see within a month whether or not that fraud algorithm that I just changed worked because I either have more fraud or I have less fraud being reported.
I
And so
gotcha.
I think that's one of the interesting things between fraud and cyber is that I think on the fraud side, sometimes it's easier to measure it and measure what's working or not working.
Very interesting. So I think this kind of leads nicely to my next question about, looking at the cybersecurity landscape today, what would you say are some of the biggest threats that kind of keep you up at night?
As a paid paranoid at a company, I mean, there's lots of different things that keep us CISOs up at night. I think the big thing is really ransomware, destructive malware as a whole. And what I can tell you about that really crystallized this to me was there was an article that Andy Greenberg wrote in Wired magazine back in I think 2017. And essentially this was a first person view of the shipping company Maersk and how the NotPetya attack affected them. And I can remember being on vacation reading this article, and I recommend not reading these kinds of articles on vacation because it doesn't lower your blood pressure, it increases it. But I can remember reading it, and essentially, they told this story about how within 5 minutes, the entire network was down. Their shipping containers, it was almost as if their ships were like navigating by the stars, like they lost everything. And it was only because of a random power outage in either like Ghana or Nigeria, I can't recall, where their Active Directory server happened to be offline at that particular time because of this random power outage, that they were able to recover because they found it, they got it, they carried it back to the UK, almost like it was an organ being transferred to be like delivered, like a heart, literal heart that was going to be put in somebody's chest. In this case, it was an Active Directory server that was going to be placed back into a data center so that they can recover from the incident. And to me, like they were down for several weeks. They had certain amount of losses of money, and like that to me really crystallized as one of the like the biggest threats that as an organization, like if you're down, you can't make money, and businesses are around to make money. They're here to make profits, or whatever kind of company. Like if you're here to help people in a nonprofit way, if you don't have your systems up and running in your email, like you can't communicate with the people you're helping. And so ultimately that to me is like one of the biggest ones that's out there.
What would you say is the worst one that you've personally experienced? If you can speak to it, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to the kinds of incidents that we've had here, but I can share that, so like especially when I was over at Verizon, and part of the Verizon data breach report, I mean, we analyzed hundreds of incidents every single year that our IR team was doing. I, as a researcher, we would analyze all of this data, combine it with a bunch of data that's out there and certain partners to see, hey, what's going on in the world in terms of data breaches, availability threats, DDoS attacks, who's behind it. what kind of attack patterns were they using, what assets were being affected, and we created a whole framework around analyzing that. And you know, back then when I was doing a lot of this work, which would have been 2008 to 2015-ish, a lot of the big incidents were always data breaches, right? It would be the like the big department store who had their credit cards taken, or it would be another data breach at a mom and pop restaurant that was a big chain that was all over the country kind of thing. And I thought those were kind of the biggest sort of incidents. You would occasionally get the nation state, so Chinese nation state APT type investigations as well, where they're attacking a company and stealing intellectual property that they were coming back and using and taking back overseas. But I think in the last, at least since 2017, like the big kinds of incidents that have really been out in the wild are the ones that are availability based, right? You think Colonial Pipeline, and I don't know if you're not on the west or the east coast, but I can remember on the east coast when that happened, there were people that made a gas run, just like a bank run, right? Like there was a lot of gas station lines where people were trying to fill up at that particular time. And I think those are kind of the big ones that we as a country and certainly as a community have seen, and it's kind of affected all of us in a lot of ways, and not just one as me as a CISO that's been a part of it.
Got it. Do you feel that there's more pressure to tighten cybersecurity to prevent losses at the various, and you could speak more broadly than specifically at Fannie Mae, but to prevent losses at the company itself, or to prevent losses from regulatory enforcement, or to prevent losses for consumer benefit? What would you, or do you think they're kind of balanced between them?
Oh, it's all of the above. And one of the ways I can describe this is there's a framework out there that I've used for years in trying to quantify and understand cyber risk at a company. And that framework is called FAIR, FAIR, stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk. Got created several years ago by a guy named Jack Jones. He's written some books about it as well. And it's a way of quantifying cyber risk to a company in business terms. So the idea is that, hey, I go figure out how my company makes money. And then from there, I can categorize my losses based on certain types of losses, like primary or secondary losses. So in a primary loss, it might be direct business because we're down for a period of time. So if you think about a retail organization that gets a DDoS attack and their website is down for an hour, they know exactly how much money they lost in that hour because they can kind of average it out over a period of time. If they have a data breach, well, you can measure it by the amount of credit monitoring and notifications that you need to use to consumers, because like you have to use companies like Equifax and Experian, TransUnion to go do that kind of service, and they pay for it. And so you could say, hey, I can model this out. I know how much it's going to cost to go disclose this to, this 50,000 users or 50,000 consumers, et cetera. And so you can really start quantifying this. One of the other kinds of things that are in there in the secondary losses is your response costs. So how much it costs to recover from a data breach or a cyber incident. Your regulatory fines are all in there that you can kind of model out. There's a lot of data that's out there from other companies that have, had these kinds of incidents. You see what kind of regulatory fines they've had, and you can start quantifying what your losses would be. And so when I'm thinking about a cyber incident, it's all of those things. It's, hey, how much is it going to cost to recover? What kind of regulatory fines? What kind of stuff we're going to need to send out to consumers to help them recover themselves from this incident where we would have lost their data. And, you have to have that whole picture of an incident as a part of it.
Just listening to the way you're describing this here, and I'm not sure a lot of our viewers will know this, but, I would presume you guys are a cost center at whatever company you're at for the most part, unless the company is specifically selling cybersecurity services or products. And being a cost center, is that why it's so important to come up with these costs of losses? Because you've got to somehow justify, hey, we need to do these projects this year. I need to get budget to do these projects. This is the cost if we don't do these projects. Is that what's driving the need to focus on the costs, or are there other things?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, I think when you're trying to prioritize the work that you need to do to protect the company, you have to start with what risks you're trying to prevent from happening, right?
Mm.
And I think the best way to do that is if you're speaking in the language of the business, which is generally going to be dollars and cents.
Yeah.
So if you show, hey, I've got this tail risk of, $100 million or whatever, and if I do these projects, it's gonna, I'm gonna be able to lower my average losses per year by X, then that's going to be a very different conversation than if I'm just having a conversation and saying, hey, yeah, I think we should do this. And yeah, I can't really tell you how I'm going to reduce the risk, but we got to do it. Right. It's a
Yeah.
very different conversation when you're bringing potential losses to the table and say, hey, these are the things we're trying to prevent. We have this amount of data and we're trying to prevent something from happening. These are the things I think we need to put in place as a part of it. And you have a better shot of prioritizing that kind of work when you can explain it in business risk and not just cyber risk.
Exactly. And I think I'm really glad we're having this conversation, because I think both you and I have shared in my obviously prior history as a head product manager at Morgan Stanley, we're in these kind of conversations about what should we fund and what should we not fund. But I think a lot of people who enter the firms at more junior roles or mid-tier roles, it's a little bit of a black box about how these things are funded, because most things that people are working on do have value and it makes no sense not to fund them. But I think just looking at them realistically, any company's got a certain revenue, they're trying to hit a certain profit margin. That means the remainder can be spent on expenses, and that needs to be divided up between the various projects. And obviously there's run the business, and there's, which is just standard stuff you need to spend. And then there's grow the business. And I think hopefully this gives people a bit of an insight of we do have to justify these projects. And as leaders, we need to weigh up which are the important ones, and because there isn't infinite funding for these things. So we've talked about businesses, and I think one thing that would be interesting to hear about is more on the consumer side. From a cybersecurity standpoint, what would you advise your average consumer to do to reduce cybersecurity risk? And I do want to ask one question off the back of that, specifically to laptops and pre-installed software, but why don't we start off with that one first?
Yeah, well, the one thing that I recommend as the help desk and chief security officer of the entire Porter family is multi-factor authentication. That is the number one thing that I recommend to everybody. And even when I'm on social media and I see somebody post a note saying, "Hey, my Facebook got compromised," I walk them through how to get to the Facebook or Instagram pages to say, this is how you set up multi-factor authentication. Like, this is really important. And to me, that's by far one of the most powerful tools. So it has everything to do with authentication. It's using password managers. It's setting up MFA. If you can use passcodes and passkeys, like, those are the things that set up.
Very interesting. And I think a lot of people, unless you've had an account takeover, you don't know how bad it is. Like, let me just give you my personal experience. My Facebook wasn't hacked as such. It was engineered for me to lose access. Basically, someone overseas kept trying to reset my password. They ended up locking out my entire Facebook. I have never, ever been able to get it back. I think a lot of people don't realize that there is no phone number for a consumer to call Instagram or Facebook or any of those. They don't care about you. Fundamentally, you are a source for them to get data to sell to advertisers. And they have enough of you being the individual consumer. So I had to actually start a new Facebook, lost everything, all my photos, never been able to get it back. Even with the connections that I have within companies based on my alumni network, I haven't been able to recover it. And I think people don't realize that once these things are gone, they could be gone. Gone. So I think that's very good advice. Now, off the back of that, another question I have, and I think this transitions nicely to the next part of our conversation on career and technology. Most laptops that we review here, a lot of the Windows ones, are being pre-installed with McAfee or Norton. And these tools are popping up these messages huge on each screen, scaring people that they need to buy one of these subscriptions. From my perspective, and what I've been telling consumers, is Windows already comes with antivirus. You probably don't need this if you're following good principles about how you're using the web. And I think, and this speaks to the fraud case, where you've got a lot of fraud schemes that are basically out there saying, pay us to fix your computer, you've been hacked, when you haven't actually been hacked. This, to me, feels like McAfee and Norton are kind of treading in that territory of being the very fraudsters they claim they're protecting you against. So my overarching question to you is, do the average laptop buyer need to buy an antivirus subscription in 2025 or 2026?
I use the default Microsoft Defender capability. It's, I don't have to worry about buying subscriptions at this point. The pop-ups don't pop up other than when it's not running and they need to like restart or something like that, or update a file. And to me, that just takes one other layer of complexity out of the mix. And, as a security professional, and, as, working with, folks at Microsoft for years at this point, like I know the kind of effort that goes into them protecting their brand, protecting their systems, the sort of telemetry that they have and finding threats and how they get that back both into the enterprise areas, but also the consumer areas. And I'm comfortable with what they've done.
Let's now kind of go back to the early stages of your career, because you've clearly been quite successful in a cybersecurity career. What would your advice be for someone potentially entering cybersecurity university? Should they attend university? Should they attend a college, a certificate? What should they do? What should they study to get ahead with get their foot in the door with a career in cybersecurity?
Number one thing, regardless of whether you go to college or don't, like you need to learn to code. And I think it's going to be easier now because of all these code assistants. Like you can learn things a little bit faster, or you can get things done a little bit different. And so like today, if I were to change that a little bit, it wouldn't just be learning how to code or learning how to automate, but it's also learning how to use AI and learning how to use Gen AI. Like I think it's going to be so critical as we're in this sort of Gen AI revolution, that you know how to use these capabilities. Because if you're not and someone else is, it's going to be a huge differentiation between them, like the amount of output and things of that nature.
May I ask, Chris, on that note, sorry to diverge here, what most people probably have used Gen AI. What differentiates someone who's just typing in a Google search and having a generative AI response or ChatGPT versus someone who knows how to use generative AI? What would you classify as the difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some cases, it might just be people aren't using it at all. And so that's where, in some ways, I'm trying to differentiate between that, where, hey, even if you're barely using it, you know how to use it, you're curious about using it. To me, that's even an indicator for somebody that I would want to hire, is like, hey, they're curious about technology. They're out there trying it, versus somebody that's like, oh, I hate it, I'm not going to try it, I'm never going to use it. You have to be able to use some of these things. Now, to answer your question more directly, though, I think that, I don't think people need to put prompt engineer on their resume because they got really good at writing prompts. But I do think that there's a little bit of an art to prompts right now on how you contextualize your prompt, right? So like if I really want to use it in a certain way and I want to get answers in a certain way, maybe with my style, like I want to give a lot more contextual cues around my prompt, right? Hey, I am a CISO at a large financial services organization. I'm going to be talking about this particular topic. Please give me, 5-level bullets that will be for this particular audience that has this kind of background, so that they will easily understand these concepts. Like that prompt right there is going to give something that's a little bit better for me to start from. And like, I'm going to know the difference between something that is terrible and good, but sometimes it's just hard starting from scratch, right?
And may I ask, Chris, why do you think coding is so important in cybersecurity? If you're working in cybersecurity for you at Fannie Mae, what kind of coding are you doing?
A lot of the coding that you need to be able to do in cyber, even in fraud, really has to do with data manipulation. It has to do with integration between different applications, how to do ETL, which is extract, transform, and load. So you're taking one data from over here, moving over here so that you can go query it and learn and get insights from it. And because cybersecurity is such a data-driven sort of field, fraud, similarly, such a data-driven field, your currency is data. So being able to manipulate and analyze data at a large scale, you're doing that with code. And so being able to interrogate APIs from lots of different places, because you have to pull lots of data together and kind of munge them together in order to get those insights. That to me is like the real key. So it's not just learning to code, but it's learning the code so that you can be able to do the kind of data science and data analytics type work that's needed for what we're doing in cybersecurity these days, or fraud for that matter.
Gotcha. Now, hearing that, let's go back to that question, because coding and what you've described, you can learn without a university degree. And I know there's this big topic right now about the cost of university and is it worth it? Do you need to get a university degree to enter the corporate world in cybersecurity?
I mean, the answer to that is no. I mean, I've got people here that graduated high school. I know a ton of people I've worked with over the years that did not go to college or just got an associate's degree and they got into cybersecurity. And so the answer is like there's lots of different winding career paths to get to the field of cybersecurity or the field of fraud. Like it doesn't require a university degree. And so I think overall the answer is no. I think the difference, is the people who are going to be successful in either field, whether you go to college or it's just high school, is that sort of curiosity bit, right? Like the people that are successful in cybersecurity, they're successful because they're curious, right? Like I call them the thread pullers. Like they see something that's a little weird and they just start pulling on the thread until they get to the end and figure out why. And to me, that is the main characteristic that is important in cybersecurity, because it's always like the little thing that is actually a sign of something big. And until someone kind of pulls on it and you understand it, you gotta track that thing back. And so it's really a mindset more so than anything that can help you get into the field.
I wonder, it's very interesting because I wonder if it's different in product management, because for me, when I was looking to hire into the product management field, I did have a huge bias for a university degree and an even bigger bias for a top university degree. And the way I saw it is, if you think about like a pie chart where you have 3 pies, there is the people who you don't know how the hell they got into that university. It's just a mystery. You're like, what's going on there? They really don't deserve to be in this class. They have no clue what's going on. Then you got the people who are fairly run-of-the-mill. They're doing the class, they're kind of getting it, they're going to get a decent job. And then you got the super high performers. And what I found was, as I looked at candidates coming in without a university degree, coming in with a university degree, and with a top school university degree, that mix shifted. And you can find top tier candidates absolutely without a university degree, but that pie is smaller. And it becomes bigger when you go to university, and much bigger when you're talking about the top tier universities, because you have to be very driven and very hardworking for the most part to get in there. Doesn't mean when I looked around my class at MIT, there wasn't a handful of people I was like, what the hell? How did they get in? But it was lesser. And so when I was hiring to the product management space, it was about trying to avoid mishires, because mishires in a corporate environment, and I don't know what it's like for you, are very, very costly. It can take a long time to manage someone out or to let someone go, a lot of HR involvement. And so we were kind of using, I would say, and I'm only referring to my organization, we're really using that as a way to reduce that risk is what we were doing. So is it the same for you or is it a bit different?
No, I mean, I would say it's probably very similar. I mean, statistically, yes. I mean, we've got more people here, and people that I've worked with in my cybersecurity career more often than not were college graduates, and it's a numbers game, right? I think part of the numbers game is the type of work, right? Like the folks that don't go to college generally have different types of careers, so they're going to go into trades and things of that nature and be very successful. By the way, I'm for trades. I'm pro trade.
There has never been a time, I think, in history where you can have a better career than you can now in trade.
100%. And so I do think it's a numbers game, right? Because it's going to be the folks that you get to college, at least my college experience. I started off as pre-med and found my way into cybersecurity like several years later. And I think that's what college helps with. It teaches some discipline. It teaches you it gives you diversity of thought because you have a whole bunch of different information from not only classes but people coming in to kind of inform your worldview and things of that nature. And I think that only helps later on in any career for that matter, whether it's cybersecurity or anything else you go into. But I thought was interesting. One of the things that I've thought about from a career standpoint, and this gets off our high school versus college sort of topic, but I think it's interesting, is I've always kind of thought that there's, three large classes of cybersecurity jobs that are out there. And then in each of those areas, there's like highly specialized type of work in each of them. And so I'll start with the specialization. Like this is something that I think has happened dramatically in, at least my career, where I came in as like a security generalist that kind of knew a little bit of everything. And that was because there wasn't specialization. So like I was the guy that was having to do vuln management and sysadmin and network security and like all these things, AppSec, everything, versus today where, there are specific functions and specializations where, hey, this guy's an architect. He's like super great design. This guy's a security engineer. This is my cyber intel, threat intel guy, my incident response person. Like those are some very specialized areas that people get into. And it's not often that people move between those. Like you have to be actively purposeful in moving people around to like kind of build out their area. Otherwise, they just stay there and get really, really deep. If I go up another level, the kind of jobs that I think are out there are, you've got operational roles. So people that work at a company like mine to protect that company. You then have your consulting roles. So this is like, hey, I'm going to provide advice to a company on how they should do their cybersecurity better. And then you have like product/services type companies. So these are people who are building services that the operational folks are using, or they're building products that you're purchasing from them. And so in each of those different areas, you're going to have different specializations, right? Like, hey, I'm a CrowdStrike product company that focuses on EDR that's going to be used by the incident response guy and the threat detection guy at this particular company. And what I found in my career is that if you move between those areas, like the higher level categories, it makes you so much more valuable in each of those different areas. So like I've been fortunate that I was a consultant. I did some work in like a product service area, and I've done work as a, here operationally. And so when I'm talking to a consultant, like I can know, hey, I know what I can get from them, and I know whether they're giving me good advice or not, because I've been there and done that. If I move to a product company, tomorrow or this next year, I know what CISOs want to buy because I've been one, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm more valuable in that role. And if I move to consulting, then I know how to advise a CISO because I've had all these problems and this is how I've solved them and I can share my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. I
And
think,
so to me that it creates a really interesting loop to kind of flow through each of those areas. And from a career pathing perspective, like if you're just coming out of college or going into college, hey, yeah, go into that consulting role. Like that helped me immensely. Like I worked with 20 to 30 different companies where I learned how they were doing cybersecurity my first 5 years in
mm,
cybersecurity,
mm.
like the way they did everything differently. Sometimes when they failed, and that was very informative for me. Like later on, in trying to like run my organization here.
Yeah. I think, Chris, you can see me just smiling through this. And I think breadth of knowledge, it matters. It really does matter. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. Whether it's breadth of knowledge in having a diverse career or breadth of knowledge by going to university and trying different things, it really comes into play. And even on the product management side, or particularly in my world, I can tell you right now, running a nightclub event management company and DJing was incredibly helpful to product managing mobile apps and websites. Because when you think of graphic art for you're creating posters or advertisements to make people want to come to a nightclub, you've got to convey a you've got to make it appealing. You've got to convey a certain message in a very quick moment of time, which is exactly what you've got to do on a website. You've got to make complex information very simple, very appealing. And same goes when I had my experience as a software developer. It made it much easier to speak in a language that the software developers understood. And so, yeah, right with you on that. And I think that's why I was, yeah, as I said, smiling so much in that response. Now, there's one thing that I'm really, I guess, dying to ask, which is if someone is, again, back on that career path, because as I said, we do have a huge amount of students who watch this channel or people who are trying to accelerate their career. You've already said very clearly that understanding, having a lot of knowledge in current gen AI is very helpful. Knowing to code is very helpful. Are there any specific applications that people should learn going into cybersecurity?
I mean, I wouldn't say applications because I think a lot of like the security applications out there, like you can learn that, and you're probably not even going to have an opportunity to learn them while you're in college in a lot of ways, because it's not the same tools that we use in the corporate world that we use to protect ourselves at home. But I would say largely like things that you can do in an academic environment and even on the side is like learn cloud, right? Like, hey, understand Azure, AWS, Google, the types of products that they're offering and the services that they have, how they match each other. Like, AWS Lambda is the same thing as Microsoft Functions, right? And like knowing that that's both their serverless and how you build applications, and then getting to know and understand like how do the security services that they provide work. All that stuff is things that anybody can learn. But when you're
Mm,
going to a
mm,
lot of these companies today that are still either going through or about to go through their digital transformation or cloud transformation, they're moving to technologies like this. Like they're largely moving their capabilities into AWS or Microsoft to get that value out of cloud and the ability to very quickly develop
mm, mm,
applications and build new
mm.
applications and things like that. And so to me, that's an opportunity for you that's coming out because you're going to be competing with folks that are also learning cloud, right? Like
Mm,
the more traditional, system admin type folks or traditional security folks, they're learning cloud too
mm.
as they're going through this. And so if you can learn it and you're coming in at the same, time that they're trying to learn, it'll be an awesome opportunity
Mm.
for that as well.
All right, Chris. So, what traits do you think are things that you look for when you're making a promotion decision, right? Someone's been successful in your organization.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when I'm looking at promotional opportunities, I mean, there's a number of factors, but one of the things that like really stands out to me is is team first, right? It's a that kind of mentality around, we hear like I grew up playing sports, so I'm you know baseball and football, basketball, etc. And because of that, it really anchors me in a team mentality.
Mm.
And when I think about cybersecurity in general, it is a team sport, right? You're only as good as your weakest link. And one of the things I've said uh, before as well is that there's also different kinds of sports with different kinds of teams, right? You've got strong link sports and you got weak link sports. Like a strong link sport is a LeBron James. You get him on your team in basketball, and like you're going to be really good because you
Mm.
have that one rock star, right? Versus a weak league sport like a football or soccer, where hey, you're only as good as that slow DB on the football team, or
Yeah.
that slow backer on soccer, because the offense will just continuously exploit that weakness over and over again, right? And so for me, like cybersecurity is a team sport, and so the folks that have that team mentality to me really stand out. The ability to bring people together to
Hmm.
get an outcome, to like continuously iterate and move forward and improve things, they stand out to me.
Okay. And what would you say if you had to choose a second trait?
I think a second trait, is kindness. Like it's a
Mm.
matter of like, how you do your job,
Mm.
and doing it in a way that uh, you know that brings everybody up and not down. I mean, it kind of gets back a little bit to team sports, that kind of team mentality. But like, in my career, I found that honey goes along a lot further than vinegar,
Yeah.
and so like there's a piece I think, if you're a good person and the karma says good things will happen.
Yeah. I gotta say, I completely agree. I think skill set is a lot easier to train than mentality. If you are driven, if you're inquisitive, if you're helping others and being kind to others when they make mistakes, that is much harder to train. That's kind of like almost innate versus the skill set which can be learned. So, my final question, given that this channel reviews and recommends laptops and we get a ton of recommendations for best laptop for cybersecurity, what do you look for in a laptop for cybersecurity?
Well, I gotta tell you, I mean, this is not me talking as Fannie Mae. I'm a Mac guy, and I've been a Mac guy for a long time. And I think a lot of that is driven from the ecosystem that they've kind of created, that allows for you to protect. They only allow certain apps to be able to be installed, right? I mean, you can change things, and if you're kind of a builder coder, you can install things. But for on average, if you can just prevent things from popping up and clicking on them and installing them, you go a long way. And so like to me, it doesn't matter if you're Windows or Unix, Linux, Mac, etc. It's all about behavior, right? And what you're what you're doing on your workstation and what you need to do on the laptop. And so, like to me, it's I try to keep all my data off of my laptop in the cloud,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's really, you know, just a means to my data. So like I can switch laptops, I don't have to switch data. I can set up my strong authentication, whether it's my fingerprint here or face match or whatever. That allows me to do everything that I need to do.
Mm-hmm. And if someone is studying cybersecurity or in the field of cybersecurity, because I think your recommendation there was for personal and home use, or is there the same recommendation for people in the field of cybersecurity as well?
I think in the field of cybersecurity, you have to know them all, unfortunately. Like it's the reason I have both here at work. Like I'm on a Windows machine today. I have a Mac machine that I also use, and I use it, 2 to 3 days a week. I use this one 2 to 3 days a week. And part of that is, at least as a security professional, I'm always trying to break the things that are happening. Like, hey, can I'm at home right now. Can I take this file and move it to my network share here, or can I move it to my personal cloud account? And I can just test those things. and they're going to be a little bit different on each machine because of the different operating systems. And so to me, I think you got to know them all,
Mhm.
regardless of the hardware. And that's what, because it's the weakest link, it's the weakest configuration, it's the thing that's unchecked that gets you. And
Mhm.
so, my organization, we have both. We have Macs, we have Windows machines, and so for me, I need to use both in order to secure both.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much. And I think, Chris, just a funny anecdote as we wrap here. One thing that Chris said when he joined the meeting is he apologized because his webcam isn't as good as he was hoping, or his mic for this interview, because his Mac is currently being repaired and he's having to use a Windows laptop. And as someone who tests a lot of laptops, I concur that realistically, Macs on average, by far, have the best webcams and mics of any of the laptops we test. There are the occasional exceptions, but for the most part, they do. And it just speaks to Macs have this overall quality. Now, I'm not saying to my audience, don't buy a Windows laptop. There's many reasons to. And as Chris just said, even in cybersecurity, you need to know all these platforms. But I thought it was just a funny anecdote that just really speaks to some of these differences that people might not realize when choosing between the different platforms. Well, Chris, thank you very much. Hopefully, the audience really enjoyed getting to hear from a leader in the cybersecurity space, and I really appreciate the time. And for my audience, there's going to be a lot more of these on our business channel, so go check that out down below. But thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.